So welcome again to the Ask an Expert supporting mental health in the workplace. My name is Martin Kuzma. I work with Nottawasaga Futures. I am a member of the Ask an Expert Planning Committee. I want to start by thanking the committee and partners. So the Planning Committee and the Ask an Expert series is led by the County of Simcoe and Jamie Bakelbeck. Thanks to their leadership, we are able to bring organizations throughout the county some excellent content as you navigate the current environment. I would encourage you to keep an eye out for future webinars. The next one in the series is about bookkeeping, and that will be coming up towards the end of March. Also want to thank regional partners who assisted with these webinars. Of course, that includes the County of Simcoe, but also the Small Business Center of Barrie, Simcoe County in Aurelia, the South Georgian-based Small Business Enterprise Center, Aurelia CDC, Nottawasaga Futures, North Simcoe Community Futures Development Corporation, and the Center for Business and Economic Development. I'd also like to take a minute at this point to mention that Nottawasaga Futures Mental Health Services Program is available for entrepreneurs in South Simcoe. Through our program, entrepreneurs are able to access confidential support sessions with a mental health professional for up to 5 hours and free of charge. To schedule a session, you can get in touch with us through ced@nottawasaga.com. Haley is also one of our consultants in this program. So if anybody wants to reach out to her and book a session with her afterwards, feel free to contact us. In terms of the questions and answers, prior to today, several of you shared questions in advance. These were provided to our guest expert, Haley, and many of the responses have been incorporated into her presentation. However, we are also hoping to have a few minutes at the end for our Q&A. If you have questions during the presentations, please type it into the chat function. You will find the chat button at the bottom of your screen. We will address as many questions as we can at the end of the presentations. I feel fortunate to have the opportunity to facilitate today's session on such an important topic, particularly with the other pressures that everyone is feeling these days, both at work and at home. We have an excellent presenter and expert with us today to share. Supporting mental health in the workplace, Haley Peak. Haley is a mental health consultant. She is driven by her own personal experiences with mental illness, stigma, and recovery. She's worked with a variety of national organizations, including the Canadian Mental Health Association, training managers how to have supportive conversations and support employee mental health. She has an extensive training and certification that support her work. Today, Haley will share her own story about living with mental illness and how to best support this in the workplace. I invite Haley to speak now. Thanks, Haley.
Awesome. Thank you, Martin, and thank you, everyone, all the partners for having me here today. I know I got the chance to speak with you guys almost a year ago. I think it was last May, I want to say, when this was all still relatively new. So I know we only have an hour or just under now. There's a lot to cover. I'm hoping to fit as much in here as I possibly can because it is obviously a big topic. I do think a lot of the questions that were pre-submitted will be addressed to some extent in this presentation. So some slides might be a little more text heavy than I usually like to do, but I'd rather you have the information than not. And then I'm used to having, faces in front of me and seeing you guys as well as I present, but I can't see you today, which is too bad. So please feel free to drop questions in the chat, as Martin said. Happy to answer them as we move through. We'll be monitoring that. And then if not, we'll have some time at the end. So I am going to just dive in because, like I said, it's a big topic, mental health in the workplace, not easy to cover in just under an hour. So for those of you that haven't seen me before, who am I and why am I here today? So as Martin mentioned, I am an entrepreneur and business owner here locally in Simcoe County. That includes right now, I am working from home. You might hear my dogs in the background, hopefully not. They're usually pretty good. I also live alone. So I do a lot of keynote speaking, currently a program manager as well for one of the projects I'm on, to 13 staff in total. 10 of them are remote, 13 are frontline in the shelters. I'm a peer supporter, so I do one-on-one support for individuals. Consultant, educator, facilitator, and most importantly in my eyes is someone who lives with mental illness and mental health challenges. Some of the labels you can see there. And that's been a huge part of my journey over the last 5-6 years almost, which has landed me in this field. I did not go to school for this. I went to school for completely different education, but this is my passion. This is the reason I do this work, because I have been the employee who struggled in the workplace. So that drove me to create work around this and come back and educate and facilitate and have safe conversations around not only how to support our employees and our staff, but how to support ourselves. And this conversation has blown up, obviously, we know, in the last year with COVID. So here we go. As I've mentioned, my journey has led me, living with mental illness, mental health challenge. You learn to not only expect uncertainty, but you learn to manage uncertainty to the best of your ability. No day is the same in my life as a result of living with, some challenges along the way. I've learned how to create strategies and practical ways to support my well-being to the best of my ability. Some days look a lot stronger than others, and that's just part of being human. And I think often when we talk about supporting our mental health and wellness, we want to have this magic recipe, this magic fix, light switch to make it all better and just get rid of the stress, get rid of the depression, get rid of the coping strategies, that might be unhealthy. And I'm going to tell you guys, there's no magic fix. I wish there was, but there is not. So what do? We do the best that we can to work towards managing that uncertainty, which has become a big part of our life over the last year. And that's our goal. So how do we do this? Self-awareness is a big part of it. We work on developing coping strategies that will sustain us through difficult times. We're human. We're going to experience both feel good emotions and maybe less than desirable emotions. That's the reality. So part of this work is really developing, we're going to talk about today, I'm hoping to fit this in, these things here, which come together to support our wellness, which in turn allows us to support others. So things I'm going to cover in the next 45 minutes. Self-awareness and coping strategies. So really taking that step back, we're going to start here and, kind of do a check-in with ourselves. Where are we at? What does that look like? Yes, we're going to talk about emotions. It's happening. We need to dig in a little here if we want to learn how to support others, especially in the workplace. That's going to lead us into a conversation on the best ways to support employees who might be struggling or who you suspect are having a hard time. A lot of this comes down to how do we have these tough conversations? This is where a lot of us get stuck. It is tricky, and we're going to talk about some practical ways to do that. And then we're also going to just briefly touch on building that individual resilience. So what do we even mean by this buzzword of resilience? I'm sure a lot of you are talking about it at work. What does it mean? What does it come down to? And how do we start to build it? All right, so self-awareness and coping strategies. Self-awareness is, again, one of those can be a buzzword, but I'm a big believer that we got to start here. So unless we are willing to take the time to really check in with ourselves and identify our own needs, be accountable for our actions, and learn to lead from vulnerability, we will fall short on supporting ourselves and those around us. This is something that I believe through and through, not only in my personal life, but in my professional life. And that's why we're starting with the self, because until we have that ability to reflect in, reach in, and look at how our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors all interact, we can't properly show up or be authentic in supporting anyone else around us. So a couple things that we really need to look at here, especially under COVID times. We're about a year in. I really try and avoid saying words like these uncertain times or in pandemic. I'm just tired of them, but it's a reality now. So we're all coming at this. We've all been at this and bringing different realities or, and experiences with us. Some of us are working from home. Some of us are working front lines. Those of us working from home might live alone. We might have 3 kids running around. We might have different responsibilities. Everybody's coming at this with different things, and it's bringing up different emotions and realities for all of us. So I do want you all to kind of just take a moment to think about, how does that impact you? And the reason we do this is acknowledging your thoughts and feelings are real, accepting them for what they are, but also recognizing that it's very okay to feel them, even the ones that don't feel so great. We need to learn to process them as human. This is a very real part of the human experience, and working to detach from the negative thought patterns that they can create. So I think it was my therapist who has told me time and time again, we have 70,000 thoughts a day, which is wild, and about 85% are negative. That's a lot to go up against when we're trying to retrain our brain and our neural pathways to think into the positive as opposed to focusing on the negative. But most importantly, in this one, again, like through and through, if you take anything away from today, I hope that it's this. We have to learn to show ourselves compassion and kindness as we move through the challenges, whether it's a challenge of an hour, a day, a month. Maybe you felt like you've been in struggle since this all went down. We've got to be compassionate with ourselves if we're really going to take the time to move through it. So anyone who's seen me present before might have seen a couple of these things, but I do think it's a great place to start. This idea of deconstructing our thoughts, emotions, and reactions. So if any of you out there have ever done any kind of talk therapy and CBT, this will not be new to you. Quote unquote, I'm not a therapist, full disclosure, but this is relevant. It's such a good way to understand it. And so this idea of the cognitive triangle, right? Learning to understand that as humans, we have thoughts. A thought is a thought. There's nothing else to it. We need to learn how thoughts dictate emotions and how our emotions actually dictate our behaviors. So this is kind of a cycle that we can get in when we're on autopilot. So a lot of us, we go in and out of our day, just you get up, you do your thing, you go to work, whether that's home or frontline at this point. You come home, you decompress, you eat dinner. Your routine is it can be so similar. We actually many of us don't even take the time to just take a step back and really think about how we are operating on a day-to-day basis. So this concept of paying attention, people like to call it mindfulness. That's another way to look at it. But what does that mean? It means just paying attention. So understanding how thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all linked is one of the best places to start when we're looking at building a self-awareness practice. This was a game changer for me when I was learning to understand how to grapple with and learn to work with my mental health challenges as opposed to trying to push them aside. And that's the name of the game here, is learning to work with the challenge, whatever it is. It doesn't need to be a mental health diagnosis. It doesn't need to be something massive. It could be just stress, right? And this is where we have to start, because it's so easy to want to just push it aside and power through and put on that hero cape. But if we're not willing to work with it, we're not going to see results. So again, I like to do this, starting with the emotion. I'm going to get you guys to entertain and play with me a little bit here in the chat. Can you please let me know in this moment, how are you feeling? And be as honest as you can, one word. What's the emotion? So if I can start, and make sure you send it to either panelists or all attendees, whatever, it doesn't matter. I just want to see where you guys are at. I'm trying to figure out what my emotion is right now. I'd say a little nervous. I get some performance anxiety, go figure, I live with anxiety, but I see some stuff starting to come in. So frustrated, overwhelmed, tired, overwhelmed, fearful, content, harried, anxious, overwhelmed, lots of overwhelmed coming in, concerned, hopeful, unsure. Yeah. I just want to make sure I didn't miss any anxious. Yeah, a couple anxious in there. The reason I like to do this is, well, A, we don't really do this throughout the day. Some of us might, most of us might not. But B, I hope that this normalizes things for you guys and makes you realize you're not alone in these feelings, that most of which are less than desirable to have. This is fairly common, and that's not to diminish how you're feeling. It's just to create community around that. So this is a good practice to just get familiar with. What is the language around emotions, right? We don't talk about it a lot. I know as a kid growing up, wasn't really part of my vocabulary. This is something I like to do with, and if this appeals to you, great. If not, that's fine. But when we talk about emotions and our thoughts, we like to dig a little deeper with it. And this helps us to really build up that self-awareness practice. So looking at this emotions wheel, and you can Google this and several varieties will come up. I just happen to like this one. So I know for me, part of what I live with is depression. So I go automatically to that feeling of, I feel sad today. Well, if I dig a little deeper, what does that actually mean to me? When I look at the next layer there, I'll see, yeah, it's the loneliness that definitely gets to me. And then from there, I'll try and dig even deeper. And I know for me, some days that leads to isolation. So this is something that you can do for yourself if learning to put vocabulary to your emotions is new. I find it really helpful. This is helpful to use at any age bracket. I've used this with adults, I've used this with youth, I've used this for myself, and it really is its own education. And then if you want to start to understand that, again, for yourself as a way of reflecting, you can even start to put it into a sentence like this, which is the I feel blank, the emotion, because I think blank, and start to connect that emotion and thought. And this really gets us to hone in on how we operate and allows us to gain a bit more control on our reactions and behaviors in our day-to-day world. So that's just a little piece I wanted to share with you guys today. We don't have time to really dig into it, but it's a good takeaway, I think, if this is something that appeals to you. This is another piece. Again, if you've seen me present, I always like to share this because I just find it so helpful, especially if you're new to this conversation of doing these check-ins of where you're at. This is the mental health continuum. You can find this on the Mental Health Commission of Canada website, originally developed by Department of National Defense. It's awesome. It really helps you kind of take a look at the spectrum of mental health and recognizing that it's not linear, right? This can be a very fluid thing. Your mood and where you fall on this continuum could change every hour, could change every day, could change every month. I know for me, I go back and forth between some things throughout one specific day, but I want you to take a look at this and maybe get a sense of where you might fall. Our mental health doesn't go from healthy to ill like that. Often we don't notice the in-betweens because we just push through, and this is when we reach burnout, which we're going to talk about. Yes, you can get a copy of the wheel, Michelle. I think you guys will also have access to the presentation after, but I'll make sure it gets out there. This is something that's a really good way to kind of just really assess where you're at, and no judgments on it, you know? This is very real, but it helps bring this conversation in and just dig a little deeper. So from that continuum, something I want to talk about is through the pandemic, have you maybe noticed shifts, again, without judgment, in your mood, in your thinking, your coping behaviors, whatever, that maybe weren't there before? So I can speak to my own experience around that. I was very aware that last summer I was definitely feeling the pull at the end of the day, that first one there, to take the edge off the stress with a drink. I've never identified with addictions. It's never been my thing, but I was aware I was using that as a coping mechanism. It took me 6 months into this January to even decide I need to do something about this. I don't like that I'm dependent on that to deal with my stress. It was also feeding my depression the next day, where I'd drop into a severe low. So it took me 6 months, but I went through that stage as a change, and I decided, all right, I'm cutting out alcohol. It's just not working for me right now. Even that one drink is not, it does not feel good the next day. So, you know, no shame in admitting that, no shame. I'm not going to judge it. It's a reality. We know substance use has gone up with the pandemic. We see it in the statistics. Think about your own life, things that you may have adopted that maybe were working for a bit, but maybe they're not where you want to be at, or there's something else we can try. And so again, just reflect on this. A lot of people are feeling less motivated, low energy, lonely. That can be a result of feeling that emotion of depression. Maybe your patience isn't what it used to be, especially if you're a leader and you're dealing with staff. That's very real. I feel with you there. I've caught myself a few times really having to check that. And before responding and reacting out of that emotion, I've got to take that step back and find an outlet before I respond. So we are going to talk a little bit about these coping strategies and self-care. And self-care, again, one of those buzzwords we hear lots about. So what even is self-care? Really anything that supports our overall mental health and wellness. That can be physical, social, emotional, spiritual, you name it, it's part of it. So what happens if we don't have it is that we run the risk of burnout, high stress, prolonged periods of stress. We can develop mental health challenges or illnesses. We can develop addictions or dependence on substance use. All of these things can result as part of prolonged stress and burnout. And so what I want you guys to consider, and it's so easy to not prioritize our self-care. I am guilty of it as well. I go in and out of being really great at it and not so great at it. So no judgment. What self-care practices or habits do you currently have? Do you have practices that maybe you consider to be the feel-good ones versus critical? For me, feel-good ones can be, you know, I don't even know right now. I feel like everything's a critical one, but I think a feel-good might be like a dog cuddle if I've had a rough day. But a critical one I know for me is, you know, I have to get outside and move, try and get into the sun if I can. I take my medication. I see my therapist. All kinds of things, like where are you at with these things? And then consider what gets in the way of your self-care, because I bet there's a lot of you on the call that can say, I don't have time, or I'm too busy, or I don't have the motivation. That's a very real one right now. And those are all valid. I think what we want to try and do is just maybe learn to wedge a little bit of time or a tiny bit of motivation where we can. So maybe you can't reach that full 1 hour workout from home. That's okay. Can you start with maybe 2 minutes of movement, 5 minutes of movement, whatever it is? Like break it down into small snack size things. That for me, when I've been in the lowest of the low in my depression, has been a game changer and has really been a lifesaver. That can look as real as if you are, finding that you are bedridden, or just you get home from work and you're on the couch and you can't do anything else. I have definitely found myself rolling off the bed or the couch just to lie flat on my back. And that's when I'm, not doing very well. That's a win for those days. So don't underestimate those things. And that's where you're going to start to build resilience, which we'll talk about. So as part of learning to manage uncertainty and supporting that mental wellness, we want to get into the habit of being proactive with our self-care and stop what we do where we wait till burnout and then we hit rock bottom and then we think, oh God, I need help. Let's start to look at the continuum and assess where you might be at and think, you know what, I might want to start looking at pulling in supports, whatever they might be. It's still good to have reactive self-care strategies, especially if you're interacting with individuals or you're in a moment during your day that's very stressful. What can you do in the moment to help protect yourself or help de-stress? Those are great to have, little things to pull on. But overall, we really want to try and move towards proactive self-care. Stress, burnout, anxiety. I bet if I could see your faces and I asked how many of you are feeling this, everybody's hand would be up. I wish I could see you guys. But yeah, I feel all these things. I'm pretty sure in January I had almost reached burnout. So it happens. As human beings, we are designed, we're meant to actually be able to withstand a certain amount of stress. A certain amount of stress is healthy for us. It's that kind of survival response. But when the stress becomes prolonged and we don't deal with it, this is when we're, potentially in trouble. And this is where burnout can really occur and those feelings of anxiety. And keep in mind, when I say anxiety here, I'm referring to it in the sense of the emotion of anxiety and not the clinical sense of a disorder, because those are two very different things. Anxiety is, I even put it here. Sometimes I amaze myself. So anxiety is a regular human emotion. We do have it in response to a certain situation. When it starts to be the constant feeling where it's ongoing all the time to everything, that's where we want to dig a little deeper. And it could be something clinical, but it also is a human emotion. So like I said, we're meant to withstand a certain amount of stress. When we don't deal with the stress is when we find ourselves in trouble. So that brain-body connection is massive. Our nervous system needs to know when we're safe. And I'm a dog mom of 2 dogs, and I've got a bigger guy and a smaller guy. And I always think about them when I think about dictating to our body that we're safe. When I let them outside in the back to play, the little guy, he gets chased by the bigger guy. And when he comes to the door thinking, I got to get out of here, I don't feel safe, he comes in the door and he shakes, right? He shakes that energy off. And I'm so aware that it's him dictating to his body, okay, you're safe, on to the next thing. If you're a parent of kids, and that example does not relate to you, but if you have kids, I get to be, an aunt to a couple of them. I watch kids, especially when they're young, they can go from really happy one moment to the next moment crying their eyes out and then back to happy. Kids are so good at feeling through an entire emotion. They go through it, they move through it, and then they're done. They've processed it. As adults, we definitely lose that somewhere along the way. I think it's a combination of society pressures, our own pressures, all of these things, but we no longer give ourselves that space to actually process the emotion, which then becomes stored in the body and builds up into all these unpleasant things we've talked about. So how do we do this? How do we tell our body that we're safe based on the research? These are some of the tested and true methods of making sure that your brain can actually dictate to your nervous system, okay, we've processed this stress, because you can say, if I wasn't exposed to X person or Y person, I wouldn't be stressed. Maybe they could be your stressor, but even still, if you remove them, you still have to tell your nervous system that you've processed and you're good. Movement is huge. If you're someone, especially who's really struggling with feelings of depression, this is a game changer. Even the tiniest bit of movement, start small and build it from there and go easy on yourself. So it could be a walk, it could be yoga, it could be exercise. I don't care. Any kind of movement is a really good way to tell your body something else. Full disclosure, before I did this presentation, I was feeling super heightened with my anxiety. So I did 30 minutes of yoga to hope that would help. I probably had too much coffee. That also wasn't a great idea. So that was my way of saying, all right, reset, let's start over. Talk therapy. There's a lot of stigma sometimes, I think, around this still, especially if you're, in a field that might not be conducive to it. But what does that look like? That can be a therapist. It can be a friend. It can be a trusted person. It can be a peer supporter. Talking it out often makes us feel so much better to just have that outlet, that safe, non-judgmental outlet. Breath work, if you're someone who's really into that, I know for me, it's been helpful in a lot of situations. It can be a good one as a reactive measure as well. Laughing, there's so much negative stuff on the news. I avoid most of it by now altogether because I don't want to see the numbers every day. That doesn't do anything for me. I know we're still in the same position, but I instead will try and pick things that bring me joy and laughter. Affection, if you have people in your bubble, awesome. Like that 6-second hug, I think they say is the ideal. Or even affection with pets, or, it can be over technology like this. What ways can you express affection? Just telling people that you're thankful for them or grateful for them. Crying. I'm a huge crier. This is such an outlet for me. If this is accessible to you, I'm sure some of you are going, yeah, a good cry, like it'll knock you out, but it feels good. And then the creative outlets, the journaling, the drawing, the music, the dancing, whatever that means to you, don't discount them. Again, ways that your nervous system and your brain speak to each other to dictate and process through difficult stuff. I didn't make this up. This was science. At the end of the day, though, really with self-care, and this has been what I've stuck to throughout the last year of the pandemic, because when we first started in this, being told to isolate when you live with depression is a very difficult thing to digest, because isolation for me was always a huge red flag that I was not doing well. So it took me about a month to adjust. And again, I've gone through cycles of that throughout the last year, where depending where I'm at, but coming back to basics, for me, this is where I try and focus my energy is, what does my eating look like? Are my eating patterns pretty consistent? Am I eating at the right times of day? What's my sleep look like? For me right now, I'm going through medication changes. The sleep's not great, so I'm trying to work on that. I've gotten my eating under better control. I'm not waiting until 3 p.m. to actually fuel myself. Movement. We need to move our bodies. We know how crappy we can feel when we're immobile all day. So whether that's sitting at a desk or you're working from your couch or whatever it looks like, make sure you're taking those movement breaks, whether it's getting up and stretching or getting out for a walk. I don't care, just make it work. Connection and purpose, right? We want to feel connected to society right now. It's really hard with everything going on. So how can we build that in, even in small doses? We are social creatures. This is really critical to our well-being. And then at the end of it is gratitude. And I know that sometimes people see this and think, yeah, be grateful. But if we can find moments of gratitude, it really does help with resetting our thought patterns. So for me, that's something that at the end of a really tough day, if I'm just going to lie down or take a hot shower and reset, I do have this moment of thinking, I am so grateful that I have a roof over my head and I have access to hot water. And even if that's it, I can feel the shift mentally. So these are the things, if everything else feels unattainable, come back to these things and focus on them in little steps, because we know how it does not feel great when we're not moving, if our sleep is impacted, and if we're not fueling our brain with the proper food, right? And then I've put it here, avoid where possible exposure to unnecessary news or shaming yourself, self-stigma, all of these things. Doom scrolling is a new thing I've learned about, where we're just on social media, just mindlessly scrolling and looking at the negative stuff. Notice the things you're doing that might be fueling that negative thought pattern. And celebrate the wins. You guys, if you're working at home and you're having a really low day and you've showered, that's a win. Or you've cooked yourself a meal, huge win. If you made it to work and back in your front line, well done. Don't discount these things right now, because we're all trying to operate under this collective trauma of a pandemic. So this is really important to remember. All right, I'm doing a time check. 2:32, okay. So So we've talked about a little bit about supporting ourselves. And again, starting there is going to carry us into being able to support others. And when we're talking others in this context, we're talking about our staff probably. So I've put up here key skills that foster safety and support in conversation. A lot of the questions that came in had to do with how do I support employees? How do I start these conversations? What does that look like? We have a lot of fear around reaching into people who might need our help. And that's fair. That's very valid. This is what I come back to. If you're looking and thinking, I need to talk to this person because I think they're having a hard time, or someone's come to me and disclosed something, but I don't really know how to gauge this conversation. This list, I hope you're taking a picture of it, but this list is a good one to remember. These are critical skills that I wish my employers had back when I reached out in the workplace twice over, 2 different workplaces for support with my mental illness. That's how I ended up here today. So this is stuff that's really, really solid to remember. So these are tough conversations, and you know what? That's okay. If you're in a leadership position, the best thing you can do for the person on the other end who might be struggling is just come at it from a place of kindness and compassion and humanity, and try and really not get rid of, but balance out that power dynamic that does exist, right? There's a lot of fear for an employee to come forward in the workplace to talk about mental health. Tons of stigma around that, tons of self-stigma around that. So as leaders, our job is to really try the best that we can without putting our own self-care in jeopardy to create a safe space for them. And again, you're human, so don't go so hard on yourself. So when we talk about this idea of being a boss versus being a leader, I know for me, managing 13 staff was not part of my original plan back in November, but here we are, and that's happening. And it's tough. A lot of them it's all remote, and I've got a few in the front line. So for me, lead from a place of vulnerability, of being very real with them, of asking, how can I support you? Because that's just what I wish I had had. So a couple things that you can look at for if you're in this position. If you need to have a difficult conversation with the staff, make sure you're making the time really intentionally. So this allows or avoids, time crunches or not having the time and whatnot. Make sure that in your schedule, you've put in time to say, okay, we've got to have this conversation. I want to give it enough attention without distraction. So walk into it with that mindset. Creating a mindset. Approach these conversations from compassion and curiosity. That's the other thing. It's easy for us to assume we know what's wrong, but really, when you're talking to someone who's struggling, just be curious. Just ask questions. Hold that space for them to just share what they're willing to share, and use those I statements. And to the best of our ability, I know we're all human and we all judge. And if you say you don't, I don't believe you, because I do it too. But avoid letting our judgments impact our reactions or our words. That's the key. Actively listening and confirming. So as someone begins to share, and they might not share everything, they might just share a little, because again, remember, as scared as you might be to have this conversation as the leader, I can promise you it's 10 times scarier for the person opening up. And I've been that person twice over, and it is terrifying. Ask those open-ended questions. We have a mentality and a tendency to want to fix as humans, especially if you're a parent. I know parents love to fix because it's in our DNA, but try and avoid that, and try and avoid focusing on what to say next, and instead just listen, hold space, take the time to repeat what you think you've heard from them so that they can have room to clarify if you haven't interpreted it correctly. Gratitude and validation. What do I mean here? So recognizing how hard it is for people to open up at work is massive, in particular around mental health. Thank them for feeling safe to share with you. This sounds simple, but I am telling you, this is incredibly powerful in a moment if someone is opening up about their mental health struggle. Thank them and validate that this is very real for them. Things like, I can hear how difficult this is for you, and I'm really happy that you felt safe enough to tell me. These are my words, you'd find your own. But that sentence right there can go such a long way in creating a trusted and safe connection. And that's the goal, is to create lines of communication, right? Avoid that shaming or blaming. I'm not saying any of you are going to do that, but that's what we want to try and avoid, because the person on the other end opening up is probably already doing a lot of that to themselves. I know I was. Leading with empathy and vulnerability. This is how I choose to manage. I think it's just because I've been someone who struggles, but I find it creates a better team altogether. It creates safe relationships. We've got to lead by example. I hear too often leaders say to me, well, my employee won't open up. They won't share with me and I think they're struggling. And I ask, well, are you willing to be vulnerable with them? Like, are you showing your human side? Because we can't expect people to open up with us if we haven't put in the work to create safety and trust in that relationship. We can't expect it. So being a leader that isn't afraid to lead with that vulnerability. I sent an email last week to my team to say, guys, I'm going through a rough time. I'm on some medication changes. It's not fun. So if you need to take breaks yourself or just tell me that, you don't have capacity for something, that's okay. I want you to be upfront and honest because here's what I've done to put boundaries up for myself. That's the dialogue with my staff, and it's worked so well for our team. And the feedback I've gotten is people grateful that they can be who they are, but also they're doing their job, right? Like they're meeting the goals they want to meet and everything's running smoothly because it's this safe dialogue to go back and forth. And when someone's struggling, being able to highlight their strengths can be helpful. And I know this was a question that came in too. It's really hard to see what you're good at when you are so consumed by a struggle. So it doesn't hurt to just remind them because our thought patterns when we're in struggle go right to the negative and right to the self-shame. So it's okay to remind them of the wins that they've had or the things that have been really powerful, because we lose sight of that very, very quickly. All right, offer to explore options. I've put in some wording here that you guys can take a look at and just obviously put your own words to it. But these are ways that we can gear our language around not fixing, but instead co-collaborating on exploring the next step. And again, we can do the best we can to be there for someone, but we can't force them to make change. So to the best of our ability, we can create the space, offer support, be there, but we can't force them to make change. So just something to keep in mind. And again, if we have an employee that's struggling severely with mental health, whether it's challenge, illness, whatever it might be, everything else still applies. We just want to make sure, especially if they're starting to share things with us, we want to make sure that we're not dropping off on the conversation and pulling in resources where need be with their support, like talk about that. And seek out the approaches and supports that they might need. Accommodations in the workplace, this is fairly common right now. What options need to be talked about here? And do everything as a team, like do it together. Remember that you don't need to take on fixing their issues for them. And we want to empower people, right? We don't want to take choices away. We want to empower them and let them know if this sounds like an option for you, or let me know which one sounds good and we can figure it out together. That's the kind of approach we're looking for, because as leaders, I know I am, and I know you guys are, you're in a tough spot. It's a lot to manage staff, their mental health, report to your director, and also manage your own mental health. It's a lot. It's a tough spot to be in. And then finally, this needs to be mentioned, recognizing the severity. And as someone is sharing, they might share details that are really personal, and that might highlight things that are a little more, severe in nature. So ask the appropriate questions. Don't drop the conversation. If your gut is telling you that you need to follow up on this, and that's there, follow that instinct. And in very, very rare situations, it might be, exploring that call to 911 if imminent threat to self or others is apparent. But again, that's its own conversation and its own training that I wish I had time to walk you guys through today, but we don't. Also just important to know. Okay, so I got 20 minutes. Whew, this is tough. Quick tips on what you can do as a leader. These are things that I've done. These are things I know other people have done. For me, I've been doing offering once a week, like virtual office hours, because my email inbox was blowing up every day. It was giving me anxiety with all kinds of little questions that I think I can't answer these enough. So once a week when it feels right for me, and it's usually a last minute thing, I build in, yesterday, for instance, from 2:30 to 4, I felt like, yeah, I could do virtual office hours. I sent out an email to my team. I said, if you guys need me, you can pop into this Zoom link. My camera was off because I didn't feel like having it on. Ask me your questions, pop in and out. And that's been working really well. And the staff actually have been taking advantage of it. And it's helped me feel less anxiety around my email inbox going nuts. Encourage breaks. It's not business as usual right now. I think we all know that by now. So can you offer flex hours? Is that a possibility with the nature of your work? I know not for everyone it is, but if it is, can we look at that? Can we look at ways to manage burnout? You know, kids are back in school now, but if we enter back into the position where they're not, can we move around with those hours so that people can focus on childcare during the day if need be? I have friends that are working for companies that are encouraging daytime power naps because they've been remote work all along. So they're like, yeah, we don't expect you to work these 8-hour days because we're in a pandemic. So that would be ridiculous if we thought that. Work with the staff to figure out what do you guys need and what can be done realistically in our environment. And again, that's going to look different across the board. And that kind of goes right into managing expectations. A lot of staff might have optics of what they think is expected of them right now. So look for ways to clarify that. And then for yourselves, it's okay to let go of expectations that we have. I think we're pretty hard on ourselves, and it's okay to understand that, yeah, we're not all operating at 100%, and that's to be expected. Something I used to have at an old job that was remote, we did a water cooler every day at 4:30 and just popped into a Google Hangout, and it was a time to just decompress, talk work if we wanted, or talk about anything else. It was great. I loved it. Can't say more about it. It was a great thing to have when we're all working remotely. Something I've been doing, can this be a phone call instead of Zoom? That Zoom fatigue is real. So if it can be a quick call, or if you do have to jump on Zoom, I've been letting people know, if you guys want your cameras off, that's fine. I get it. Obviously, it's always nice to see people's faces, but there's a lot of stress relief to just be like, yeah, I'm turning my camera off. So go with it. And then something I do quite frequently is asking, what can I do to support you? And just saying that gives people the space to know that if there was something, they can come forward. And then this last one I put in here, which is avoiding toxic positivity. And this isn't to say don't focus on the positive, but we don't want to silver line things. So if somebody shares something that's difficult or has a negative vibe to it, we need to acknowledge that and instead try and go, well, at least we don't want to do that. The at least statements, right? They're a little tricky. And that can lead to someone feeling really dismissed. So we want to try and avoid that as much as we can. Yoga and meditation are my salvation right now. Yes, I love that. Okay, time check. Cool. As you guys can see, there's so much. I feel like I could do 3 presentations in one here, but I'm hoping you guys are taking stuff away, and I know that the replay will be available because there's a lot of text on these, which I don't usually love, but I'd rather you have the information. So resilience. What is this buzzword we keep hearing about? What is it? How do we build it? I wish you guys can type it into the chat. I was gonna say, I wish I could see you guys so you could talk to me about it, but if you want to put it in the chat, feel welcome to. So what do we even mean when we talk about resilience? Individual resilience is kind of the angle I'm going at today. So this is something that the reason we started with self-awareness is because you want to build your individual resilience, you're starting with self-awareness. So if you're someone who hates emotions, I'm sorry, but it's got to be done in some capacity or another. Being self-aware and putting those practices in place of just paying attention, learning your triggers, learning your habits, being open to taking accountability where we may have made a mistake or reacted in a way we wish we hadn't, connecting our thoughts and feelings. All of these things lead into building up your individual resilience. For me, for a long time, I didn't think I had a ton of resilience. My journey with mental health over the last 5 years has been quite the roller coaster. But I've realized in very specific situations, yeah, that's resilience. I guess I do have it. I felt like when the pandemic started, I didn't have any because I was in a pretty good place, and then lockdown happened and it was just like the plummet. To be very frank with you guys, back in January, going through medication changes, I ended up in a crisis situation as a result of going off medication, which was pretty scary to be in after 2 years of never being in one. And it was funny when I came out of it and I was in a better state of mind. I was so aware that that same situation 4 years prior had me attempting suicide. 2 years prior, I had checked myself into RVH because I knew I was a threat to myself. And this January, in that same situation, I knew it was happening. I had the intrusive thoughts. I could feel that deep down pain, but I also was able in the same state to tell myself it's going to pass and you're totally safe. And as painful as it was in the moment, I actually forced myself to journal about it and journal out what was happening. The next day I looked back and thought, damn, all right, I guess I've grown. I'll take that as a win. And that's like, that to me was a huge eye opener of resilience of this is how we build it, because we learn as we grow, we learn our triggers, we learn where we need to pull in supports. And, you know, I haven't done this on my own. I've done this with a ton of support in place. You name it, I've probably tried it. I've done everything and anything out there to figure out my mental health. And luckily I've got a good thing going now, but it changes over time, right? And I think the pandemic's really challenged a lot of us in ways that we never maybe expected. So whether you came into this with preconditioned things or stuff you already lived with, or I know a lot of people who are dealing with anxiety for the very first time and are so terrified by it, or dealing with feelings of depression for the first time, or leaning on substances like they didn't used to. There's a lot of that happening, and that can be very scary if this is new to you. But I'm here to tell you that starting in that, having open dialogue like this, looking at it without judgment and being really kind to yourself and human and knowing you're not alone in that is such a powerful place to start. And asking for help. That is where things will change. And that, yes, is probably the scariest step, but it is the most critical one. If I hadn't have done that, I probably wouldn't be here today to be talking to you guys about this. So it is worth it. And it's a game changer. So resilience, you know, the definition, if we're going to put one on it, the ability to recover from challenges, difficulties, and those range. They can range from smaller challenges to traumatic experiences, and trauma is defined, it's subjective. We all define it differently. It's our own individual experience. So a couple points on how we can build it. And this is from a colleague of mine who I work quite closely with, Kim Sunderland. She's been in the field of mental health a little longer than I have and done a lot of work at a national level, but I have high respect for her work. And so she talks about building it through these things. Noticing things in our everyday world on an ongoing basis that make us happy or content. So if you can't access being with people physically that bring you joy, can you look at pictures? Or if you're not with your pets, can you look at pictures? For me, the fact that we're getting more daylight right now, I'm so grateful for. I love it. I'm noticing these things to avoid my brain going down that negative thought pattern. This is the next point. Focusing on the positives rather than the negatives. Avoiding catastrophizing. This can be very easy to do, or the what ifs, right? Like, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? That ruminating is where the anxiety likes to grab hold and just run away with your brain. That can be a tough one. So notice when it's happening and focus on the things in your control. So right now with COVID, there is a lot out of our control. There's a lot of information overload, but what's in your control, and focus your energy and efforts there. Intentionally practicing kindness and compassion towards ourselves. Again, if you walk away with anything today, I hope that it is this, because I am constantly working at this. I am no expert at it. There are days where I am not good at it at all. Practicing that idea of gratitude and thankfulness, maybe writing in a journal if that speaks to you. There's a lot of science behind unpacking what's in our brain, either speaking it or writing it. And then the concept of mindfulness, being present and aware in our current moments. I think that COVID has really, when we come out of it, I'm hoping we're all going to come out of it with this newfound gratitude for not taking things for granted. You know, that hug with a person, I'm probably going to want to hug the world, but we're going to really come out of it thinking, I am so grateful to be able to see this person or do this thing or walk here and not have to worry about all of these other fears that we had for so long. Meditation. And when I say meditation, I don't mean the stereotypical, what some of you might be thinking. It can be anything. It can be a walk in the park. It can be a walk in the forest. It can be sitting. It can be breathing. It can be ice fishing. It can be doing the dishes. It can be super meditative if you're into that. Cleaning. I sometimes find that meditative, which I know some of you might think is strange, but it's true. Okay, so I do want to leave a couple minutes for questions. So additional resources, this was asked quite a bit. If your employer has an EAP program, navigating the mental health system, I know is a nightmare if it's a new one for you, but know the difference between a therapist and psychotherapist. Those are one and the same-ish. You might be able to access one if you have coverage in your benefits, or you pay out of pocket, unfortunately. Family doctors, they're your key in if you're looking at the medication route. They can also provide a referral to a psychiatrist if that's a route that feels good to get that assessment from a clinical standpoint. These are your medication gatekeepers. If you're dealing with severe mental health, I'm always an advocate for a psychiatrist over a family doctor. That's just, I think they can dive a little deeper. It's their specialty. CMHA, Simcoe County, I work quite closely with them, and we've got programming that's free, especially peer support, where you're connecting with someone with lived experience who's in a positive space of recovery, who can walk you through all of this. RVH has a ton of programs as well. They've got inpatient and outpatient addiction services. The RAM clinic's a really popular one. 211 is a good place that houses a bunch of different mental health resources. The Ontario Structured Psychotherapy Program, it may have changed names, I can't remember, it's changed a couple of times, but it is a free, mostly self-guided program, but also you get access to a counselor for 12 or 16 weeks. It requires a doctor referral, but it's free psychotherapy. It's CBT structured, so what we kind of talked about at the start. Catholic Family Services, even if you're not religious, the name doesn't matter. They provide free access to individual, couple, and family counseling. I've got a few clients I recommend to them. Kids Help Phone, talk, text, chat. I think there's one other option there for kids, but they actually expanded their network to adults as well with COVID. Jack.org, I think they're an awesome organization. If you have youth in your life that are struggling, they've got a ton of resources on there that are really fabulous. Even if you're trying to understand mental health for your kids or things that might help. And then if you're an employer or an employee standpoint, the Workplace Strategies for Mental Health by Canada Life, everything on their website is free. Tons of free resources, guys. They're great. I've worked quite closely with them in the past. I would highly recommend checking them out. Okay, so I managed to make it through all that in under an hour, which I'm kind of impressed about because that could have been 4 presentations in one. But that all being said, I do want to leave space for questions. I haven't seen any come through. So Martin, I don't know if you've seen any, but if anything's coming out, please type it into the chat now. I'll give it a minute here. Yeah. But I want to just close with this. I know I just threw a lot of information at you guys. This concept of mental health and being well. And so really, I love this quote. So to be well is not to live in this state of perpetual safety and calm, but to move fluidly from a state of adversity, risk, adventure, or excitement back to safety and calm and out again. So I love this because it speaks directly to the fluidity of our mental health and our ability to bounce back, recover, be resilient, whatever you want to call it, from challenge. And that's truly what we're aiming for. Challenge is to be expected, uncertainty is to be expected. So we are working to put things in place for ourselves to be able to do our best to face challenge head on when it comes. And it doesn't mean we have to say it's easy, because it's not. And it doesn't mean we have to do it alone, because we don't. But knowing when we might need to reach for support or when we might need to reach for just taking a step back. So I want to thank you guys for being here. Hopefully I didn't speak too fast. And yeah, if you have any questions, my email is there. You can check out my website and a training there that I do as well, which is all about supporting someone in struggle. I think it's great. I'm glad you guys took the hour out of your afternoon to be here, and I hope you took at least one thing away today. So I'll pass it back to you, Martin. I don't know if anything came in, but hopefully most of the questions were answered that were submitted.
Yes, well, thank you for your time, Hailey. It was a great presentation. Currently, there's no questions in the question and answer chat box, but if anybody wants to post something, we'll wait a couple, maybe 30 seconds or so. There's a question from the floor, but it's disappeared. So I'm not sure if that person is still attending.
No problem. And again, like if people have questions, you can email me directly if that's easier. I do a lot of different conversations on different topics, and you know, I just wanted to give you guys as much as possible in the hour because it is a huge topic. And, you know, depending on what the nature of your organization is, this conversation looks different throughout. So yeah, thank you guys for being here, and hopefully I'll see you next time, and maybe we'll be out of a pandemic at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Hailey. Before I wrap up, I just wanted to say it is normal to feel anxious and afraid while we deal with the effects of this pandemic. History has shown that the mental health impact of a disaster outlasts the physical impact, suggesting that today's elevated mental health need will continue well beyond the virus outbreak itself. We all know the situation is stressful for everyone. People living with mental illness and addictions may be finding it especially difficult to cope. So if you or someone you know is struggling, there are resources available to support you. Remember, no matter who you are, what you're going through, you don't have to go through it alone. And if you are experiencing a mental health crisis, please contact 911 immediately or present yourself to the nearest emergency department. And having said that, I want to thank everybody for attending. A couple of things before we close out the session. Survey will be sent out by email along with a recording of the session after the event. So please watch for that in your email boxes and let us know what your thoughts are. If you're interested in hearing more from experts on other areas of business support and business topics, information about the series can be found at simco.ca/ask-an-expert. And then again, thank you, Haley, for your time and insights today. And thank you to the County of Simcoe and all the partners involved. Wishing everyone a fantastic rest of the day and week. Take care and stay safe.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.